Absolutely massive, folks. It's just been confirmed that Donald Trump wants to buy as much Bitcoin as possible. So there is no upper limit to the strategic Bitcoin reserve. Not like you thought, okay, you'll just keep buying, or something like that. But there shouldn't be any upper limit. So they're trying to find ways to buy as much Bitcoin as possible. This has now been confirmed by Bo Hines, the executive director of Donald Trump, who mentioned it in a closed meeting at the Bitcoin Policy Institute, where they discussed the Bitcoin bill and other related topics last Tuesday in a private session. And of course, you can't buy an infinite amount of Bitcoin, that's pretty clear. Adam Beck jumped in right away and said, hey, there are only 21 million Bitcoins, and there are also lost Bitcoins, so you can't buy an infinite amount of Bitcoin. But here, the statement actually came out that Donald Trump wants to buy as much Bitcoin as possible. And we're going to take a look at this now because this is a total game changer. Most people thought, okay, maybe we'll buy 1 million Bitcoins, like Cynthia Lummis suggested. Or some thought, okay, maybe it'll even be less than 1 million and so on. Michael Saylor then threw 5 million into the mix, publishing various scenarios at the Bitcoin Policy Institute. 1.2 million, then I think 2.4 million or something like that, and another 5 million Bitcoins that can be bought. And now it's being said here, please don't focus on all those scenarios. Instead, we want to buy as many Bitcoins as possible. So you really need to understand what's going on here. It tells you straight to your face what the USA is up to. That means that it's not being kept secret in any way, but it's being told straight to your face. Hey guys, we don't want to buy some Bitcoin. We want to completely exaggerate. We want to completely line our pockets. And it could be that the plan is to crash the Bitcoin price a bit more, although that's just pure conspiracy theory. And I'm not 100% sure if this message was even intended for the public. But let's take a look at what's going on right now because this is really going to change everything. And you can still get ahead of the US here because right now, the US isn't buying any Bitcoin yet. These are just the plans that are being leaked and published, and this could be the biggest asymmetric opportunity of all time. We'll take a look at why this is a massive opportunity. Just look at this. Up here you can see the moon. If things go well, then we'll be here soon. If things go badly, then Donald Trump has screwed us over and we'll be rug pulled. Feel free to let me know in the comments whether we are seeing the biggest rug pull of all time or whether Donald Trump is really going through with it. But if these statements are true, and we're going to look at those statements shortly, then we could be facing a massive rally ahead that's almost impossible to predict in terms of what will happen with the Bitcoin price. So the first thing I saw was actually a message from the Bitcoin historian, who wrote, "Breaking news. Trump's crypto advisor told industry leaders that the US wants to buy as much Bitcoin as possible. There's no limit to the size of the strategic Bitcoin reserve. It's absolutely huge. I was just chilling at the beach when they dropped this massive news." But then Adam Beck jumped in right away, and Adam Beck was mentioned by Satoshi Nakamoto in the white paper. He immediately says, there's a limit, 21 million, and we're not selling any. So the additional costs are going to skyrocket, causing government purchases to hit an inelastic Bitcoin supply and accelerate the supply shock. So Adam Beck, who was already mentioned in the white paper, firmly believes that this is going to trigger a supply shock, and he also says, hey, I'm not selling my Bitcoins. So Donald Trump is assuming, okay, we're buying unlimited Bitcoin, which isn't possible technically because there are only 21 million Bitcoins. If we subtract, say, 5 million or 4 million lost Bitcoins, then there's still nearly 1 million Bitcoins that haven't even been mined yet and so on. That means we're only looking at around 16 million or so Bitcoins that are actually available. Adam Beck isn't going to sell his Bitcoins. Let me know in the comments if you would sell your Bitcoin for Donald Trump. So I know a lot of people who aren't going to sell their Bitcoins either, so we have to subtract a few million Bitcoins, and then the US is left with maybe a few million, 1, 2, 3, 4 million Bitcoins or so, that they can actually buy up. So technically, that's not expressed correctly when they say there's no limit upwards. But we also know from the past that Donald Trump or his team has exaggerated things from time to time. Donald Trump also said that we will mine all the remaining Bitcoins in the U.S. That's obviously not possible. These are statements that are just technically incorrect, but they sound really good from a propaganda standpoint. So, I don't expect the US to buy 15 million Bitcoins. That wouldn't make any sense at all. I mean, if the US ends up owning all the Bitcoin, then the Bitcoin network wouldn't be worth anything anymore. The Bitcoin network does need to maintain a certain level of decentralization, and some people have already said, okay, maybe Donald Trump means that there will be a new fork, and on this new fork, the 21 million Bitcoin limit will be bypassed, and then there will be an infinite number of Bitcoins on that fork, allowing Donald Trump to buy as many Bitcoins as he wants in his own shitcoin fork, and so on. There are now various speculations, or it could just be ignorance, or it might simply be a propaganda move where they exaggerated the news hopelessly. But now let's take a look at the official article. I'll link it for you below, where the leak actually happened. It says here that during a closed discussion round hosted by the Bitcoin Policy Institute on Tuesday, Bo Hines, the executive director of the Presidential Working Group on Digital Assets, told the attendees that the White House intends to acquire as much Bitcoin as possible, according to several participants. So this is the official statement, and now here comes the kicker. This was the highlight of why there's been so much discussion about the US wanting to buy as much Bitcoin as possible, and there's no limit upwards. When someone in the room inquired how much Bitcoin the US government could ultimately acquire, Hines humorously remarked that the question was like asking someone how many dollars they ultimately wanted. A participant in the discussion told Decrypt. So Decrypt is the institute or platform that published all of this, and that's where the statement comes from that there's no limit upwards. It just comes from the statement that Bo Hines made, saying, if you had the choice of how many dollars you could have, you wouldn't just say $2 or $3, you'd want as many dollars as possible. The difference here between dollars and Bitcoin is that dollars can be printed endlessly, which means you theoretically need more and more dollars just to maintain your purchasing power. With Bitcoin, there's simply a cap on how much there can be. I think that some things have been misinterpreted, for example, that it was said that there should be no upper limit on the strategic Bitcoin reserve. They probably just misinterpreted the question or the discussion here because Bo Hines was talking about fiat money, and they made the switch, saying, if he wants unlimited fiat money, then he must also want unlimited Bitcoin. But that statement doesn't make sense when it comes to Bitcoin. It makes sense for fiat money. I think it was just a misunderstanding of what he said, or he wasn't clear enough in his statement. I think he knows himself that you can't accumulate unlimited Bitcoin. And then it goes on to say that a White House official confirmed to Decrypt that Hines actually made the statement about acquiring as much Bitcoin as possible, but added that such purchases would be made in a budget-neutral way, so they wouldn't cost taxpayers a dime. So, this is exactly the same as in the executive order. You can buy Bitcoin, you evaluate how to potentially buy Bitcoin, but you can't do it with taxpayer money. That means you can only do it with budget-neutral methods. That means, for example, the Exchange Stabilization Fund, here you can use surpluses, you can take it from Bitcoin mining tax revenues, you can take it from tariffs, you can finance it through other deficit savings via the Department of Government Efficiency, you can reevaluate or reassess the gold reserves. Actually, you should say you can reassess the gold reserves, leverage them, and buy Bitcoin with that. You can sell the shitcoins in the strategic shitcoin reserve and use that to buy Bitcoin. There are various techniques you can use, so there are definitely 10 to 15 ways to buy Bitcoin in a budget-neutral manner. But the important thing we know now is that it was always unclear how much Bitcoin could potentially be accumulated. We still don't know how much Bitcoin can be accumulated at a minimum, but at least we know how much can be accumulated at a maximum, and there's no limit upwards. So, potentially, there's nothing stopping us from following Michael Saylor's plan to buy 25% of the Bitcoin network and acquire 5 million Bitcoins. I'm still skeptical because I don't believe the US can actually pull this off. If the US goes all in on Bitcoin, the prices are going to shoot up so high that the US won't even be able to accumulate that much Bitcoin monetarily. I mean, they might manage to do it, but then they just end up devaluing their own currency. It's like Osman wants to drive the dollar into the ground on purpose or something. There are also theories that, for example, they say, okay, hey, they're betting on Bitcoin so that later they can hyperinflate the dollar and have a safe haven, a refuge where they can inflate the dollar. These are some theses from Mark Goodwin or Whitney Webb, who talk about the dollar Bitcoin theory and so on. There's even a book about it. I actually found one of the strongest statements and assessments on this here from Macroscope, who always has very, very good reports and analyses here, and he makes a very, very crucial comment here, and you should really listen very carefully to what he has to say here. He says here that this is the biggest price discrepancy that I've ever experienced in the markets. So by price discrepancy, he simply means that the price here is different from the underlying news situation. And now he says here, and consider why this is happening. Because the risk component of Bitcoin drives the price up temporarily more than anything else in a risk-averse environment. That means he's saying that the Bitcoin price should actually be much, much higher. But if we are currently in a risk-off sentiment in Bitcoin is simply not determined by the news situation, but by liquidity. Or, it's even more about the market's risk assessment, the risk narrative that the market currently has, and right now, the market is more in panic mode than in gear mode. It doesn't really matter what news comes out. For all I care, Donald Trump could announce tomorrow that he met Satoshi Nakamoto and that Satoshi is transferring all the Bitcoins to him or something, and he's turning it into a strategic Bitcoin reserve or whatever. What's really moving the markets right now isn't the specifics, but the overall sentiment, not just for Bitcoin, but across the global financial markets. And as long as we have a risk of sentiment, we can have bullish news here without end. But when we have a risk-on sentiment, all that bullishness that's been held back will be released massively. Like when you push a volleyball underwater. So all the bullish news right now is like the water that's always trying to push the volleyball up, but there's still a force pushing the volleyball down, and that's the risk-off sentiment. And as soon as the risk-off sentiment switches to risk-on, all the bullish news that we've had all this time will cause the volleyball to explode upwards, and that's the Bitcoin price that will then explode upwards. And that's what Macroscope is trying to tell you, that there's currently a massive price discrepancy. It's not just Macroscope talking about this. Adam Back brings it up too. He calls it an information asymmetry, meaning the news situation is way more intense than the Bitcoin price. I actually read about this in Bitcoin news as well. They say that if you're reading this, you're working with asymmetric information that the markets haven't priced in yet. So, asymmetric information isn't insider information, but it's information that maybe 1% of people understand, while 99% don't get it because they've got cucumbers over their eyes and ears, and I don't know, all their senses are clogged with cucumbers, tomatoes, and bananas, or something. But it seems like it's not getting through to people. Everyone's in panic mode and doesn't realize that the biggest financial revolution of all time is happening right now. Cynthia Loomis has done something really significant. She just updated her Bitcoin bill and declared that you have to buy a minimum amount of Bitcoin each year. She also implemented stricter HODL rules. So we just need to put one and one together. So we have a bullish setup like never before in Bitcoin's history. On the same page, we have a Bitcoin price that's going down because we're in a risk-off sentiment, meaning people are pulling out of risk and moving into safer investments, and folks are really freaking out right now. And anyone who can see through all of this clearly, and can step out of the panic mode, and just evaluate things objectively, can really benefit massively. This isn't financial advice or anything. You definitely need to draw your own conclusions. And on top of that, you have to say, you don't really know if Bo Hines has been drinking, if he's been partying, or if he's maybe putting out false news or faking it or something. It could also be that he's just putting out false information. So, it wasn't Donald Trump who said it, but Bo Hines, his executive. You know, his advisor or whatever you want to call him, his close associate, who's also an official from the White House. I mean, he probably wouldn't be well advised to spread any fake news or anything like that. Otherwise, he'd probably be out of the picture pretty quickly. But there's also the chance that some of the news is fake, that he's just spreading some nonsense or whatever. I'm definitely super bullish on the present, even more than on the future, because the future is just an illusion anyway. That means we create the future from every moment. No one has been in the future or anything like that, just my concept or whatever. Life only happens in the here and now. For sure, if you're feeling bullish and want to front-run Donald Trump and all those folks, including the nation-states that might be joining in, I'll drop a link below to 21 Bitcoin, where you can easily, safely, and simply buy Bitcoin. You can still get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin with the code BitcoinHotel. Now I have to turn off the light. Let me show you the hyper-bullish moon here. Attention, everyone, woman to the moon. I'm signing off here from El Salvador. Let me show you the city down here, but there's not much blinking going on. By the way, this is the cool part here. Check this out. There are no lights here. Here, when you're out at night in El Salvador, there aren't any big streetlights, nothing at all. It's really dark here. And accordingly, you can see such a cool moon here. You can see it here too. The stars, my camera isn't good enough to capture them at all, but at least you can see the moon. It's really awesome to be out here in nature and actually have a real starry sky, not everything lit up with all kinds of lights. Alright folks, see you later. Peace out.